Hello. How much do we really know about the people we pass by on the streets every day? It's entirely possible that behind an unassuming exterior lies something sinister and dangerous. Today's story will make you ponder what might be hidden in the depths of an ordinary person's soul. Some people come into this world to create, to radiate light like stars. But even they are not immune to encountering those who can cut their creative path short for just a few $100s. In 2006, in Manhattan, among the numerous offices converted from former residential spaces, there was a studio belonging to a rather well-known actress, director, and screenwriter named Adrienne Shelly. Her real surname was Levine. Adrienne was born on June 24, 1966, in Queens, New York, USA. When the girl turned 2, the family moved to Long Island. From an early age, Adrienne exhibited an innate passion for theatrical arts. She was a true young actress through and through. Noticing this, her parents did everything to foster their daughter's talents, enrolling her in various theater studios and acting courses. At the age of 10, Adrienne found herself in one of the most popular art centers. It had once been attended by such famous actors as Robert Downey Jr. and Natalie Portman. It was here that young Adrienne realized the stage was her calling. At 11, she landed her first real role, playing the lead in a musical. Later, she would admit this was the impetus for her future accomplishments. Alongside her favorite pursuit, she was a typical teenager who loved spending time with friends, easily making new ones thanks to her outgoing nature. Everything seemed to be going splendidly, but at the age of 12, Adrienne suffered her first major loss. Her father Sheldon passed away unexpectedly. It was then that the girl decided to adopt the stage name Shelley, thus immortalizing her dad's name. Sheldon had always supported the young talent to a greater extent than her mother. After the father's death, the woman even tried to steer her daughter in a different direction, advising Adrienne to choose a more traditional major for her university studies. The mother also approved of her daughter's aspiration to eventually become an actress. However, she believed it to be an oversaturated field with fierce competition, where breaking through was nearly impossible, and perhaps her daughter should opt for something simpler. But the young actress was unstoppable. From the very beginning, Adrienne moved resolutely along her chosen path. According to most sources, she enrolled in Boston University's film production program with a focus on directing. She never completed her university education, but the knowledge she acquired proved sufficient for future success. Persistence mattered most, as the girl never lost faith in herself and relentlessly forged ahead. At 18, she moved out of her parents' home together with 3 other girls she had studied with at university. They all dreamed of becoming actresses, but initially, it all came down to auditions and rejections, at least for her friends. However, this was a typical situation in the film industry. There was always extremely high competition for any role. Adrienne never gave up hope of finding her place in cinema, dedicating all her free time to auditions. She was quite fortunate to quickly land several minor roles in films as an extra. It was enough to make a living. A defining event took place in 1989. She met film director Hal Hartley, who offered her the lead role in the movie The Unbelievable Truth. For Adrienne, this was her big break and the official start of her acting career. Moreover, her relationship with the director developed remarkably well. She became his muse. This allowed the girl to secure role after role in his films. Thus, the young actress became known not only in New York but also in Hollywood. Gradually, having established herself in the largest hub of filmmaking in the United States of America, she got the green light. Several offers for leading roles in films came from Los Angeles, but Adrienne Shelly turned most of them down. She wanted to stay and continue building her career here. New York was a more powerful center of the film industry for her, even greater than Hollywood. Adrienne did not miss the opportunity to develop. She focused on work, methodically laying the foundation for future success without changing her place of residence, and work. The girl starred in numerous films, including theatrical productions and comedies. During this period, it occurred to Adrienne to try her hand at being a screenwriter and director. In 2001, fate brought her together with Andy Ostroy, with whom she entered into a romantic relationship. The couple got married, and in 2003, they had a daughter named Sophie. While expecting her firstborn, the mother-to-be set about writing the script for a romantic comedy called Waitress. The plot was quite realistic. The protagonist, while pregnant, is forced to flee from her cruel husband who had abused her throughout their married life. It was a rather bold move, as pregnancy is usually portrayed in a positive light in films, but Adrienne Shelly decided to show the other side of this delicate condition, focusing on the trials that befall a woman during this period. She was convinced that such a perspective would undoubtedly work as something innovative. After Sophie's birth, the woman made the decision not to abandon her work in the film industry. The movie was indeed a success. It was a true moment of glory for Adrienne. When the film was presented to audiences in 2007, Adrienne had directed it herself and played one of the leading roles, but she was not destined to revel in the triumph. During the making of Waitress, she rented an office on Abingdon Square in the West Village of Manhattan. It was an ordinary apartment where Adrienne spent time alone. For her, this place turned into a kind of safe haven. Adrienne created here, and for this purpose, she crafted a special atmosphere. The woman treated the makeshift studio with great affection. Extremely reverently. She was fastidious, even excessively so. This was noted by everyone who visited her at her workplace. It was evident that Adrienne Shelly had a great future ahead of her. All the more horrific and shocking was the tragic end to her stellar career. On November 1, 2006, the family was living an ordinary day. As always, around 7 a.m., Adrienne woke up and began getting ready to go to work at her office. Her husband Andy and daughter Sophie also got up. As usual, the husband was supposed to take the girl to kindergarten. He was also an actor and producer, so after that, he would go to work, giving his wife a ride along the way. Usually, throughout the day, the couple constantly kept in touch with each other. They would call and share all the events happening around them. The couple had not broken this tradition for years. On November 1, Adrienne Shelly was silent, which seemed extremely unusual. She never called once, did not answer any of her husband's calls. At first, this did not worry Andy too much. He knew how devoted his wife was to her work. She might have been busy, as it was on this very day that she planned to start several new projects at once. The husband thought she had simply become too engrossed and did not want to bother her with trifles. His workday lasted until evening. Having finished his shift, Andy called his wife again, who once more ignored him. It all seemed strange now. Around 5:30 p.m., the father picked up his daughter from daycare. Adrienne was still out of reach, and the situation truly began to raise alarm. Whenever the wife was not busy, she always found time to communicate with her husband, at least calling back or sending a message that she was very occupied. But this time, everything looked increasingly alarming. During this period, the weather in New York left much to be desired, so Andy would often pick up his wife from her rented office on such gloomy days. He intended to do the same this time. So he called his wife to agree on a time, but she did not answer again. Andy could no longer reassure himself. His wife's behavior seemed too uncharacteristic. The father took the child to the grandmother's house and asked her to watch Sophie while he went to his wife's office. Andy did not have spare keys to his wife's office. As soon as he arrived at this apartment building, he immediately approached the doorman, who was supposed to have a duplicate key. The concierge refused to give it to the man due to strict rules, so Andy tried to persuade him to go upstairs together. The doorman knew Adrienne Shelly well, partly because she was already famous, and he was also acquainted with her husband. The employee had indeed noticed that the story's heroine had not left the building all day. It was already too late. The woman should have finished work and been getting ready to go home. The concierge agreed to Andy's proposal, but upon reaching the right floor, he stopped, handing over the keys. However, they were not needed. the door turned out to be unlocked. The actress had a habit of treating her office with extreme reverence. She always locked it, even if she was leaving for a short while. Naturally, she would have locked the door from the inside so that no one would disturb her. Finding himself in the studio, the husband immediately noticed his wife's clothes and shoes in their usual place. A special area had been designated for this, so she had to be inside. Andy immediately called out her name, but there was no response. The tension grew with each passing moment. He began feverishly searching the premises, room by room. In the kitchen, there was a bag of groceries that no one had touched. In the bedroom, a sheet had been ripped off the bed, but there were no signs of the woman's presence. Andy reached the bathroom, and there he saw the body of his 40-year-old wife, Adrienne Shelly. The woman was hanging from a sheet attached to the shower rod. Struck with horror, the man screamed and instantly rushed to take down his beloved, trying to help. The apartment building's superintendent was on the stairwell landing at the time. Hearing the scream, he immediately called the police and an ambulance. Realizing something terrible had happened. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they found Andy there, sobbing. He was shocked by what had occurred and could not recover for a long time. Investigators concluded that the successful actress and director had committed suicide. But Andy categorically rejected this version. He would not even entertain the idea of such a turn of events. The man knew for certain that his wife had never suffered from depression, had no mental disorders or any addictions. Not even the slightest preconditions were found that could have prompted a person to voluntarily take their own life. On the contrary, during that period, her career was rapidly ascending, everything was going splendidly. Each subsequent production surpassed the previous one. Adrienne Shelly had a wonderful relationship with her husband and little daughter, whom she adored. Even from a moral standpoint, it raised numerous questions. Adrienne had lost her father when she was only 12, so she would never have done something like that to her own daughter. However, law enforcement officials continued to insist on their position, arguing that a depressive state is not necessarily associated with problems in one's personal life or family. All this can happen covertly, imperceptibly to others. Outwardly, a person may appear completely normal and happy until the very last moment, and no one will even suspect the serious issues they were actually struggling with all this time. But Andy was not going to give up. He kept insisting and pressuring law enforcement officers, demanding a more thorough investigation. He considered the initial conclusions absurd, was convinced his wife had been murdered, and was determined to prove it. A serious battle lay ahead of him, as the autopsy results confirmed that the cause of Adrienne Shelly's death was strangulation by a sheet wrapped around her neck. And after that, the widowed Andy only intensified the pressure, continuing to insist that the case should be treated as a homicide. Of course, such statements required at least some solid grounds. No blood or signs of struggle were found in the office. Practically nothing that could indicate the presence of an outsider in Adrienne's studio on the day of her death, but there were strange aspects. Would a person ready to take their own life go grocery shopping and behave as if they had plans for tomorrow? During a second, more thorough examination of the crime scene, something suspicious was discovered. A barely noticeable shoe print was found on the toilet lid, suggesting that the traces could indeed have been left by an outside party. It seemed as if the perpetrator or the victim herself had stood on the toilet lid to reach the shower rod and tie the sheet. This could have also facilitated the lifting of the body, and to Andy, it was obvious that this print was left by the criminal. The man told the detectives about his wife's obsession with cleanliness in her studio, how she had even set up a special cabinet and stand near the door where all visitors had to place their shoes. She did not allow anyone to walk around the apartment in their outdoor footwear, and the husband had repeatedly seen how people who forgot this rule incurred extreme displeasure from his wife. Obviously, only someone who entered the premises without her permission could have left a shoe print on the toilet lid. Without asking for Adrienne Shelly's consent, his words were confirmed by all the actress's close acquaintances who had been to her studio at least once. The detectives decided to pay more attention to these traces, examined the tread pattern, analyzed the shoe size, the results corroborated the widower's words. The pattern did not match either the configuration or the size of the shoes worn by the story's heroine and her husband. Moreover, fingerprints were found on the shower rod that did not belong to the deceased. Someone had tried to wipe them off but had not done so thoroughly enough. All the people from the victim's inner circle were checked, but none of them wore such shoes. The fingerprints also did not match those of the couple's acquaintances. Analysis of the trace on the toilet lid showed that it had been left by chalk or similar dust. Obviously, such dirt is rarely found in offices or apartments where no renovations or other construction-related activities are being carried out. Investigators suggested that the trace could have been left by someone involved in the construction industry or renovations in some way. Initially, they thought Adrienne might have been expecting a repairman that day, but no one had heard anything about it. The woman would have certainly told her husband about it, but the studio was indeed in perfect condition. Adrienne had no need for a contractor's services. One of the investigators working on the case recalled an interesting detail. When the actress was found dead, noise could be heard in her studio coming from the floor below. It sounded as if the workers were breaking something, working with hammers and jackhammers. Of course, the police treated this assumption with some skepticism but decided to check. Renovations were indeed underway below Adrienne Shelly's studio. The apartment belonged to a man who had no connection to the victim, was not even acquainted with her. He confirmed that on November 1st, workers were here performing the final stage of the renovation. He himself was not living in the apartment at the time, as the construction company was supposed to demolish walls and erect new partitions. This seemed interesting because, with such work, a lot of dust is indeed generated, leaving white traces. The apartment owner allowed the detectives to freely inspect the premises. Indeed, there was a lot of dust here, samples of which were taken for examination. Later, the laboratory confirmed that this dust was identical to the traces found in Adrienne's apartment, meaning one of the workers had been to her office. After that, the detectives visited the general contractor, the Bradford Company, which had provided the workers. The police wanted to find out who exactly was at the site during that period. At this stage, difficulties arose, as it turned out that it was common practice for this organization to engage unofficially employed workers to reduce the cost of services. At that time, this had become a widespread phenomenon in the USA due to the influx of immigrants. Many of the employees found themselves here illegally, without proper visas. However, the organizer of this particular project was able to list all the people who were in the apartment on November 1st after some time. The most suspicious of them turned out to be Diego Pillco. At that moment, the guy was only 19 years old. He had arrived in the United States shortly before the tragedy and immediately got a job at Bradford to save up money for a start. First of all, he planned to pay off the person in his homeland of Ecuador who had lent him money for the move to the USA. The guy behaved strangely, sometimes even alarmingly. Diego was quickly found. He was still working for this company. The young man was taken to the police station for questioning, and the detectives did not beat around the bush. They bluntly asked him about the murder of Adrienne Shelly. Contrary to expectations, Diego did not deny it and immediately confessed. It happened almost as soon as he found himself in the room. While recounting his version of events, he repeatedly emphasized that it was an accident. The guy insisted he was a good person who had simply found himself in a hopeless situation, desperately struggling with financial hardship. According to his confession, on November 1st, he was in the apartment located one floor below Adrienne's studio, together with several young people. They were all performing one of the final stages of the work. Due to the demolition of walls, it was very noisy, but this seemed like a regular matter. According to the guy, Adrienne came down just an hour after they started working. The young woman was extremely dissatisfied with such loud noise, rudely yelling at them that the workers were preventing her from concentrating. Diego described her behavior as if the stranger was trying to humiliate him, considering her work more important. She demanded that the workers stop making noise, which seemed absurd since wall demolition cannot be done silently. Moreover, they were not violating anything. The young men calmly explained the situation to Adrienne Shelly, but the woman would not listen. She entered the apartment and started waving her arms. In a fit of anger, Diego grabbed a hammer and threw it in her direction. The actress miraculously managed to dodge the tool. After that, she screamed even louder and began threatening to call the police. With those words, the woman left the apartment and headed upstairs to her place. Diego followed her. He realized he had gone too far, so he begged Adrienne not to call the police. He feared there would be problems, and he would face deportation to his homeland. Adrienne would not listen. She was furious when she entered her studio. Diego grabbed her arm and yanked it, continuing to persuade her not to report to the police. She probably perceived it all as an attack and started screaming. Diego lost self-control again, hit the woman, after which she fell, struck her head, and went still. The young man assumed he had not calculated his strength, and the woman had died from the blow to the head. He was seized by real panic. The construction worker locked himself in the office and began contemplating his next moves. Adrienne was not getting up, not regaining consciousness. Diego finally realized he had killed a person. After that, he decided to cover up the traces of the crime, so he took a sheet from the bed and staged a suicide in the bathroom. This was the initial version of the young man's confession, but the police did not believe it. The first discrepancy noticed by law enforcement was the complete absence of dust on the deceased's shoes. If she had indeed entered the apartment where renovations were underway, as the killer claimed, traces would inevitably have been left on her shoes. Moreover, the actress's shoes were on a specially designated shelf, meaning she had taken them off, which also contradicted the young man's story. From his words, there was simply no time to take off the shoes and put them there. Another important contradiction was the total absence of witnesses to Adrienne Shelly's aggressive behavior. Even the other workers did not confirm the criminal's words that the woman had come down to them and argued. During that period, there were enough neighbors in the apartments who would have heard both the scandal and the commotion raised by the actress. However, no one heard anything. Another discrepancy was noticed by Andy, the victim's husband. He pointed out the lack of cash in his wife's wallet, although she was a person who preferred using bills rather than credit cards. She always carried at least a few $100s on her. Sometimes she carried even larger sums for various needs. This small quirk allowed them to understand the likely motive. The illegal immigrant obviously just wanted to profit at Adrienne's expense, and most importantly, the medical examiner established that the circumstances of the woman's death did not match. Shelley was still alive when she was hanged, and the cause of death was strangulation. However, no head injury was found. Despite all the inconsistencies, Diego maintained for quite some time the version that Adrienne Shelly herself had provoked the conflict. Under the pressure of obvious contradictions, Diego's story began to undergo certain changes. Detectives spoke with the suspect's inner circle to understand what kind of person he was in general. Unfortunately, he interacted with few people outside of work. Everyone who had dealings with him knew that Diego Pillco was struggling with financial difficulties and desperately wanted to pay off his debts. Otherwise, he seemed like an ordinary young man trying to gain a foothold in the USA. After talking to the residents of this apartment building, several witnesses were found at once who spoke about Diego's suspicious behavior. According to one girl, the suspect had an unpleasant habit of staring at females for a long time. This gaze caused alarm. However, no one noticed any aggression on his part. He did not attack anyone else. Andy continued to insist that Diego's version was a complete lie. He was simply trying to justify himself. The wife had never behaved aggressively, treated other people's work with respect, no matter what it was. At the same time, the absence of cash in the wallet indicated the real purpose. Diego could have ended up in Adrienne Shelly's apartment for the purpose of robbery. Equipment, appliances, and other valuables had not disappeared, but a few $100s were missing. Shortly before the trial, scheduled for 2008, the defendant voiced a new version that seemed more convincing than the previous one. According to him, Diego Pillco arrived at the workplace together with Adrienne. When they were riding in the elevator, he was staring at the young woman. Suddenly, he realized he had seen the actress somewhere before and quickly figured out that a celebrity was in front of him. Diego instantly concluded that she had money, and this was a chance to solve all his financial problems. In his opinion, there was certainly something to gain in the actress's apartment. He pretended to go up to the very top floor. Thus, he tracked ere Adrienne got out and which apartment the heroine of this story headed to. He closely watched and listened throughout the day, calculated the moment the woman left, probably to get to the store. She returned some time later, habitually undressed, leaving all her clothes and shoes in the closets. The woman had brought bags, did not close the door behind her, as her hands were occupied. She went to the kitchen, apparently to put away the purchased groceries. Diego closely monitored her every move, having positioned himself on the stairwell landing. The guy saw the half-open door, the bag from which the wallet was sticking out. The temptation turned out to be too great, an opportunity for theft presented itself to him. The criminal carefully peeked into the apartment, made sure Adrienne did not see him, so he went inside, grabbed the wallet, took out the cash. When he wanted to put it back, the woman returned and came face to face with him. She screamed and rushed to the phone, obviously to call the police. Diego panicked, caught up with her, covered her mouth and nose. She quickly lost consciousness from suffocation. He understood that leaving the robbed victim alive was too risky. Adrienne Shelly had seen the worker from the floor below more than once. She could easily recognize the robber. The criminal decided to stage a suicide, using a sheet in the shower rod for this purpose. He confirmed that he stood on the toilet lid to reach and hang the victim. At the trial, the criminal apologized to the actress's family, whose creative path was so tragically cut short. Of course, no one was going to forgive him. Andy hoped that he would manage to secure a life sentence for this brute. All the more shocking to him was the court's decision. For unintentional murder, Diego was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He would be released shortly before his 45th birthday. Despite the fact that this decision seemed unfair, it was final. After all these tragic events, Andy made every effort to immortalize his wife's name in history. He established a foundation of the same name that provides scholarships and financial support to young female directors. In addition, the husband made a movie about her that reflects the tragic path of this strong woman. For its final episode, he even met face-to-face with Diego, who gave a short interview and recounted the story of his crime on camera. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.